lordship, and its opposite, servitude. Eventually, servitude vanishes and only lordship remains. I guess we can say that's la ilaha illallah, in the path of emptying ourselves to become full of emptiness or faqr. Without that emptiness, there's no place in our beings for the remembrance or the zikr, the remembrance of Allah. So she is saying that finally, through our servitude, when we become completely empty of all the things which distract us from Allah and His service, then the Lord, Rabbina, descends and fills us, and then really there is La ilaha illallah, the true state. Another wonderful woman, for example, al-Fadl, used to do public teachings in Nishapur, attended by some of the great Sufi masters of that city. Another teacher, Shawana, from the Persian Gulf, preached to the people and recited the Quran to them. Her sessions were attended by ascetics, worshipers, and those who were close to God and the masters of hearts and self-denial. Hukaima, another important figure in Syria, is described as the ustaz, or teacher, of the female Sufi, Rabia bint Ismail. Women Sufis sometimes taught other women Sufis. And then, and they had great schools with many, many disciples there. This is the early school of female asceticism in Basra, and later there was another school in Syria. Aspects of this early female asceticism was also weeping. Women wept, and this, he says, Sulami, this practice appears to have reflected remorse for the sinful nature of humanity. And sometimes women wept in conjunction with what they call wara, the systematic avoidance of anything that might be either ritually or ethically impure. It entails an understanding of the human body as a sacred vessel, which can also, this idea, be found in early Christianity. Just skipping to something. The description of these early Sufi women is something which really I think we are incapable of today. They were very much isolated. They sometimes stayed alone for years. They did great philanthropy. They were really ascetics. And I concluded from this, since they were very near to the time, much nearer than us, and to even the way of purity, I think they're very close to Sayyidatna Maryam, the Virgin Mary. This other book I just held you up, called Mary, the Blessed Virgin of Islam, was a doctoral thesis by my friend Alea Schleifer. And Abdul Hakim Murad, who will be speaking to you this evening, wrote the introduction. He's a dear old friend of mine. And this describes how the Muslims from Central Asia to Spain focused on the Virgin Mary over centuries. I mean, much more so than the Christians. And it's quite interesting, some of these Muslims, there was a great debate over the years that because revelation came to Mary, she was even considered to be a prophet or a prophetess by some. But Mary, as we all know, as Muslims, is a symbol for both men and women. She's considered the highest woman in all creation. And the reason she's a symbol for both men and women is because of her incredible submission, symbolic of the religion of Islam itself. She, therefore, furnishes a model for those who follow the teaching of the Quran. A central aspect of Mary's submission is located in her devoutness and her steadfastness in prayer. During the period from infancy to puberty, when Mary led a hermit's life in her mihrab, she acquired fame for her persevering, untiring worship. The Quranic attribute for Mary, al-Qunut, according to Ibn Kathir, means humble, pious obedience to God and surrender to His will. Ibn Kathir cites the early commentator, Mujahid, to the effect that Mary stood in prayer until her ankles became swollen. Al-Uzay observes she was tranquil in her mihrab, kneeling, prostrating, standing, until perspiration poured from her feet, and after the angel gave her the command to obedience, She stood up in prayer until her feet hurt, flowed with blood, and festered. Her prayer was performed in the most intense sense. In fact, during this period of her life, she existed solely for that purpose. And as we know, both Khadija and Fatima were considered the best women of their times, but Mary has been considered again as the best woman of all times and a sign for all peoples, in that the purity of her spiritual striving is a supreme goal for us all, awakening us to the pristine vision of the meaning of obedience, devoutness, and worship, the inner reality of the believer. And so, with this in mind, I would like us all to take some counsels or reminders from some of the early Muslim sisters that we have. And so I'm going to just tell you about a few of their names and where they lived, and maybe something that they said. I will not, as you all know, with hadith, there's always an isnad. So-and-so told so-and-so told so-and-so that the Prophet said this. There are isnads with all of these, but for the sake of brevity, I will not do the isnads. I'll begin with in the 8th century with Miriam of Basra. And she reminds us very much, you know, we're always told, trust Allah, don't worry about your sustenance. Some of us struggle and strive to have enough, but I was told in my studies and by Muslims all the time that what we will be receiving in terms of our livelihood is guaranteed for us, so we don't have to have anxiety. We can be like birds flying and fold in our wings, and we won't fall. We don't have to keep flapping. And she says it very nicely. Miriam of Basra, I have never been preoccupied with my sustenance, nor have I exhausted myself in seeking it from the day I heard the statement of God the glorious and mighty, for in heaven is your sustenance, as is that which you are promised. Here is Shabaka of Basra. And Shabaka maintained underground cells in her house for her female students, where they learned self-denial and spiritual practice.